She stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind tugging at her hair as she gazed into the abyss below. Her heart was heavy with the weight of decisions made and lost time that could never be reclaimed. How had it come to this? She had tried so hard, fought so fiercely to hold on to everything, her dreams, her love, her hope. But now, in the quiet moments before it all crumbled, she realized that sometimes the hardest part isn't letting go. It's realizing that you were never meant to hold on in the first place. The rain fell in sheets, relentless and unyielding, turning the streets of the city into rivers of gray. Zara Grant pulled her collar tighter around her neck, trying to shield herself from the biting cold. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways, carrying the scent of wet concrete and damp earth. She had been walking for what felt like hours, searching for shelter, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar streets for a sign of anything that might offer warmth. She had just moved to the city, a place she had hoped would offer the anonymity she so desperately sought. Zara had left her past behind, her small, quiet hometown where everyone knew everything about everyone. In the city, she had hoped to disappear into the noise, to blend into the crowd, to escape the memories that lingered like shadows in the corners of her mind. But the weight of it all, the memories, the guilt, followed her here, just as heavy as the rain. She passed street after street, most of them empty at this late hour. The usual hum of the city, cars, chatter, the distant music of a bar was muffled under the blanket of rain. Zara's footsteps echoed eerily on the cobblestone streets, the sound a constant reminder of her loneliness. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Zara pulled it out, half hoping it would be a message, something to distract her, but it was just an alert about an incoming storm. She sighed and stuffed the phone back into her pocket. Her apartment wasn't far now, but the thought of facing the empty walls of the place made her stomach churn. She needed a moment to breathe, to collect herself before retreating into the silence. That's when she saw it. Nestled between two larger buildings, almost hidden in the shadows of the streetlights, was a small shop. The window was fogged up, but Zara could just make out the faint shape of an old-fashioned clock inside. The sign above the door read, "Tempus Fugit." Zara had never seen it before, and yet there was something oddly familiar about it. A strange pull. An irresistible curiosity tugged at her. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to it. Without thinking, she crossed the street and approached the door. The shop was old. The wood of the door cracked and weathered. The brass handle gleamed despite the rain, as though it had been polished recently. Zara hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door. Something in the back of her mind told her to keep walking, to ignore the shop and its strange allure. But the pull was too strong. She grasped the handle and pushed the door open. A soft chime rang through the air, and Zara stepped inside, grateful for the warmth that immediately enveloped her. The air inside was thick with the smell of aged wood and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. The shop was dimly lit, the shelves filled with an array of clocks, large and small, ornate and simple, some ticking, some silent. The sound of the clocks filled the room, a constant ticking and talking, a rhythm that seemed to echo in Zara's chest. The walls were lined with shelves, and each one was packed with clocks of all kinds: brass pendulums, silver pocket watches, cuckoo clocks, and ornate grandfather clocks. It was a strange collection, as if the shop had been collecting timepieces for centuries. Zara felt as though she had stepped into another world, one that existed outside the modern city, where time was something to be cherished, not rushed. It was almost as though the clocks themselves held secrets, whispering to each other in a language only they understood. Behind the counter, an elderly man stood, his back slightly hunched. His face was lined with age, and his glasses rested low on his nose. He was dressed in a faded brown suit, the fabric worn but well cared for, and his white hair was neatly combed, though a bit thin. He looked up as Zara entered, his eyes sharp and calculating. Yet there was something warm in his gaze, something inviting. "Good evening," the old man said in a voice that seemed both soft and authoritative. "Can I help you, miss?" Zara wasn't sure why she felt so compelled to speak. but the words left her mouth before she could stop them. "I was just looking for shelter from the storm." The old man nodded, his expression understanding. "You've come to the right place," he said. "This shop has been standing for many years, weathering storms of all kinds. It's a place where time itself is kept safe." Zara frowned. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She looked around the shop again, her eyes drawn to the variety of clocks. There was something fascinating about them, something that seemed to reach out to her. She stepped closer to the counter, her curiosity growing. The man noticed her interest. "Ah, I see you're drawn to my collection," he said with a slight smile. "Time has always fascinated me. The way it slips through our fingers, the way it shapes us without us even realizing it." Zara glanced up at the old man. "You sell these clocks?" she asked, her voice unsure. The old man chuckled softly, a dry, raspy sound. "Oh yes, I sell them. But not just any clocks, miss. These clocks, they do more than just tell time. They can change it." Zara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Change it?" she repeated, her voice skeptical. The old man nodded, his smile deepening. "Yes, some clocks can move time forward. Some can turn it back, and some..." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Some can make you see things differently. Time is not always as it seems, miss. It can be manipulated if you know how." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what the old man was talking about, but there was something about his words that stirred something deep inside her. A desire, a need. She had always wondered if there was a way to change the past, to undo the mistakes she had made. Her gaze drifted toward a small display on the counter. A pocket watch. It was old, its brass casing worn and scratched, but it seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The second's hand moved with a rhythmic precision that seemed unnatural, as if it were marking time in a way that was different from the others. "That one," the old man said, noticing her gaze. "That is the watch you seek." Zara hesitated, her fingers itching to reach for it. "How much is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man gave a mysterious smile. "Not money, miss. This watch can only be obtained with something far more precious than gold." Zara felt a tug of unease in her chest, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the watch. It was as though it was calling to her, promising something she didn't fully understand but desperately wanted. "Something more precious?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. The old man leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Time, miss. Time is the price." Zara's breath caught in her throat, but before she could respond, the old man turned away, his hands moving to place the watch in a small, velvet-lined box. He slid it across the counter toward her. "Take it. It's yours now. But be careful. Time can be a cruel master." Zara's fingers brushed the box, and for a brief moment, everything felt different, as though she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. The moment passed, and she found herself holding the box, the weight of it both, comforting and heavy. Without fully understanding why, she nodded. "I'll take it." The old man smiled again, a glimmer of something knowing in his eyes. "Then, miss, you've made a choice. Welcome to the world of time." Zara woke with a start, her pulse quick and her mind racing. The remnants of a strange dream lingered in the back of her mind, but as she sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes, she realized that it wasn't the dream that disturbed her. It was the heavy weight in her hand, the soft tick-tock of a clock echoing. In the silence of her bedroom, she glanced down, and there it was, the pocket watch. The same one the old man, Mr. Travers, had given her the night before in his shop. She didn't remember taking it to bed with her, but there it was, nestled in her palm, its brass surface gleaming in the weak morning light. Her heart pounded as she stared at the watch, the sound of its ticking growing louder in the stillness of her room. The second hand moved with unnerving precision, each tick feeling like a small, deliberate choice. The smooth, curved surface of the watch felt oddly familiar, like something she'd held before, even though she knew that was impossible. She had never seen anything like it. Not in all her years of collecting antiques or studying oddities. This watch wasn't like the others. It was different. Zara sat up fully, her curiosity gnawing at her. She turned the watch over in her hands, inspecting it. There was no engraving, no mark to show who had made it. Just a smooth, golden surface with a faint, intricate pattern etched along the edge, like delicate vines curling around the metal. The more she looked at it, the more she felt its pull, as if it were drawing her into something larger than herself. The dream she had woken from was fading from her memory, but she could recall a part of it. The moment she stood in the middle of a clock tower surrounded by countless ticking clocks. There was a voice, deep and ancient, telling her she had to decide. But decide what? She didn't know. The dream was slipping away like sand through her fingers. With a deep breath, Zara shook off the unsettling feeling. She was just tired. She had been out late, and her mind was playing tricks on her. Still, her fingers lingered on the watch. She hesitated for a moment and then, almost instinctively, pressed the small button at the top to open the case. Inside, the watch face was an elegant display of numbers and dials, but there was something odd about the way it looked. The hands were moving in reverse. She blinked, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The second hand moved backward, tick, 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 as if time itself was flowing in the opposite direction. Zara's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. She twisted the crown of the watch, hoping to adjust it, to make it stop, but the hands refused to move forward. Instead, they continued to spin backward. Her mind raced. This is impossible. Time can't move backward. That's not how things work. But as she watched, the reverse movement of the hands was undeniable. Her fingers trembled as she turned the watch over in her palm, looking for an explanation. There were no markings on the back, no instructions, nothing to explain what she was holding in her hand. Then, without thinking, Zara did something she immediately regretted. She turned the watch's crown once more, pushing it forward, hoping that it would correct itself. She could feel the sharp click as the gears inside the watch moved. But then, the world around her seemed to shift. The room flickered for a moment, and then she was standing in her hallway. It was the same hallway she had left just moments ago, but it felt different. The air felt thicker, heavier. The walls seemed slightly dimmer, as though the light had faded since she'd been in this very spot. She looked down at her hands, the watch still clutched tightly in her grasp. A sinking feeling spread through her chest. She had been here before, hadn't she? It took a moment for her to realize what was wrong. The hallway was exactly the same, but it wasn't. She hadn't left her bedroom yet, had she? Hadn't she just been sitting in bed? Zara's mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what was happening. Her pulse quickened and her breath caught in her throat. This isn't real. This can't be real. Panicking, she hurried back to her bedroom, the watch still ticking backward in her hand. Her heart thudded in her chest as she rushed to the bed, her mind screaming for answers. When she stepped inside her bedroom, she froze. It was the same. The bed was neatly made, her clothes were scattered across the floor where she had left them. The window was shut tight, the rain still pattering against the glass. But there was something about it that felt wrong. The air felt denser, and the ticking of the watch in her hand seemed to echo in her ears, louder now. Tick, 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 louder and louder. She looked at the clock on her nightstand. It's the same time. 8:07 a.m., but no. It couldn't be. It was just a few moments ago that she had been lying in bed, holding the watch. Wasn't it? Zara's eyes flicked back to the watch. The second hand continued to spin backward, ticking away in reverse. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a rising sense of dread overwhelming her. She hadn't just gone back in time, she had changed it. Hadn't she? A flash of memory surged into her mind. Her conversation with Mr. Travers. His words echoed, almost as if they had been a warning. Time can be a cruel master. She turned the crown of the watch again, trying to return things to normal. But as the second hand jerked forward, she suddenly found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the clock. The time was the same as before, 8:07 a.m., but it felt different. Everything felt different, as if she had been pulled out of time and placed back into it, and yet everything had changed in subtle ways she couldn't quite grasp. Zara's hands shook as she held the watch. What have I done? The ticking continued, louder now, tick, 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 and it felt as though the walls themselves were breathing. Zara couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a waking dream. The events of the morning swirled around her like a tangled mess of thoughts and confusion. She had tried to dismiss it as nothing more than a strange coincidence, the kind of thing that might happen when you're exhausted and disoriented. But deep down, she knew better. The watch, the damn pocket watch, had changed something. It had bent time, even if she didn't fully understand how or why. The ticking of the watch, still in her hand, was deafening. It was as though it was mocking her, reminding her of the chaos she had unleashed. Tick, tick, tick. The sound reverberated in her ears, louder than any clock she'd ever heard. Zara gripped it tighter, desperate to make sense of what was happening. She stood up from the bed, pacing the small confines of her apartment. The room felt wrong, the air thick with something she couldn't quite name. The watch was heavy in her palm, a constant presence, like a weight pulling her in different directions. She couldn't stop herself from fiddling with the crown again, twisting it as if hoping for a different result, a better outcome. This time, nothing changed. No flicker of time, no distortion, just the normal, relentless ticking of the watch in her hand. Frustrated, Zara tossed it onto the bed, but she couldn't. Leave it there. She knew that if she didn't understand it, if she didn't figure out how it worked, she wouldn't be able to move forward. The watch had already affected her, and she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. She returned to the living room, sitting on the couch and staring out the rain-streaked window. The city beyond seemed muted, as if the world outside was separated from her by some invisible barrier. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, as if reminding her that time continued to move forward, even if she didn't know how to follow it anymore. Zara's thoughts turned to Mr. Travers, the old clockmaker. His words from the night before echoed in her mind. Time is not always as it seems, miss. It can be manipulated if you know how. She stood abruptly, the sudden movement startling her. She grabbed her coat and the watch, shoving it into her pocket, and rushed out the door. She needed to find the shop again. She needed to speak to him, to understand what was happening to her before it spiraled completely out of control. The rain had softened, but the city streets were still wet, and the cold wind made Zara pull her coat tighter around her. She walked quickly, her footsteps echoing against the pavement, as though she were walking in a vacuum. She passed the usual buildings, the tall, impersonal skyscrapers, the crowded cafes, the shops with their bright windows, all bustling with people oblivious to the shift in the world she felt inside. It took her a while to get there, but when she reached the street corner, Zara froze. The shop was gone. She blinked, uncertain. She walked down the alley where the shop should have been. Nothing. The space that had once held the small, weathered clock shop was now filled with rubble and vacant, boarded-up windows. It was as though it had never existed at all. Her stomach churned. Panic crept into her chest as she walked the perimeter of the abandoned building, looking for any sign that the shop had ever been there. Nothing. The world seemed to be closing. In around her, her sense of reality fraying at the edges. "Where are you?" she whispered to herself. Zara pulled out the watch, her fingers shaking. She stared at it as if it would offer some kind of explanation, some way to fix the mess she had created. She twisted the crown again, but this time, nothing happened. The tick-tock remained the same, steady and unchanging. She was beginning to understand that no matter how much she turned the crown, she couldn't undo the damage. As she stood there, lost and disoriented, she felt a strange sensation, like a sudden shift in the air, an invisible ripple through space. A voice, soft yet distinct, broke the silence. Looking for something. Zara turned quickly, heart racing. Standing in the shadow of the alley, hidden behind the remnants of a crumbling brick wall, was a man. His clothes were dark, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. but his eyes, sharp and intense, were clear as day. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Something about him felt off. She didn't know why, but there was a danger in his presence, an unsettling energy that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. I'm looking for the clock shop, she said, her voice trembling, slightly. It was here, I was just here yesterday, but now it's gone. The man didn't move, didn't say a word. His eyes stayed fixed on her, measuring, observing. Finally, he spoke again. The shop was never meant to stay. He said, his voice low and steady. You're looking for something that doesn't belong to you, and that's not a mistake you can undo. Zara took a step back, confusion and fear swirling in her chest. Who are you? The man smiled. A cold, knowing smile that made her feel as though he could see through her, into something deep and hidden inside. I am someone who understands time, he said, his voice barely a whisper now. The way it works, the way it breaks. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Breaks? She repeated, her mind reeling. What do you mean? What do you know about the watch? He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and for the first time, Zara felt the weight of his words. A web of choices. The watch you hold doesn't just bend time, he said softly, almost as if telling her a secret. It unravels it. It shows you all the paths you could have taken, all the choices you could have made, and all the ones you didn't. But that's not without consequences. The more you twist time, the more you'll lose. Zara took a step back, her head spinning. I don't understand. What are you talking about? He tilted his head slightly, as though considering her for the first time. You're already starting to see it, aren't you? The feeling of slipping between moments, of things shifting, of choices you didn't even know you made. She clenched, her fists, the watch heavy in her palm. I just want to understand. I didn't mean to. You never mean to, he interrupted, his voice hardening. But it's too late. Time has already been altered, and the more you play with it, the more tangled you'll become in its threads. Zara's knees felt weak, her mind struggling to keep up with the words tumbling from his mouth. She looked at the watch again, her grip tightening. What do I do now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man's lips twisted into a faint, unsettling grin. Now you choose. But be careful, Zara. The paths ahead of you are not all clear, and once you begin to unravel time, it may never stitch itself back together. The man disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, slipping back into the shadows of the alley with an eerie grace. Zara stood there, staring after him, her mind racing. The watch unravels time. It shows you all the paths you could have taken. His words echoed in her mind, and she found herself gripping the pocket watch tighter, as though it might slip from her grasp if she didn't hold on. She had made a mistake. She knew it now. She had tampered with something beyond her understanding. Time was not a toy to be twisted at will. It was a force, ancient and untamable. And now she had felt its wrath. Zara's thoughts were clouded as she stumbled back to her apartment. Rain beginning to fall harder once again. She didn't notice the people passing her, nor the steady hum of the city that had once felt so alive. Now it felt distant, like she was watching it all through a fogged window, separated from it by an invisible barrier. She needed to understand. She needed to know how to stop this thing she had unleashed. But where could she turn? Mr. Travers had vanished, and the shop was nothing but an empty, crumbling building. The man in the alley had left her with more questions than answers. The more you twist time, the more tangled you'll become in its threads. His warning was the only thing that remained clear in her mind. When she reached her apartment, Zara locked the door behind her and slumped against it, the weight of her thoughts pressing on her chest. The watch was still clutched in her hand, its tick-tick-ticking like a metronome, counting down to something she couldn't control. She had to make a choice. She knew that now. But what choice? She couldn't undo what had been done, could she? The watch seemed to pulse in her hand, and she felt an inexplicable pull to open it again. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix it. She could turn back time just a little bit, make everything right again. Just one small change. That was all she needed. Just one more twist, one more turn, and it would all go back to the way it was. Zara's fingers trembled as she opened the watch, revealing the face once again. The second hand was still moving backward, but now it seemed to move more slowly, almost like it was struggling. Her heart raced as she adjusted the crown, but before she could make another turn, something unexpected happened. The room flickered, like the blink of an eye, and Zara was no longer standing in her apartment. She was back in the alley, where she had met the mysterious man. The streets were wet, and the city lights cast long shadows against the walls of the buildings. But there was something wrong, something that made her stomach churn with dread. The sound of distant voices filled the air, but the people walking down the street didn't seem to notice her. They walked by, oblivious as though she were invisible. Zara gasped and reached for the watch again, but she couldn't move. She tried to call out to someone, anyone, but her voice didn't seem to exist. She was locked in place, a silent observer, in a world that wasn't quite real. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same man, the one who had warned her about the dangers of the watch. He stepped into the alley, his face partially obscured by the hood, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're starting to see it now, aren't you?" His voice was low, almost melodic, but it held an unsettling edge. "The more you twist time, the more the threads of reality begin to fray. The more you change, the less you belong." Zara tried to move, tried to scream, but nothing came out. The man smiled faintly, as if he were watching her struggle with the inevitability of it all. "Time doesn't forgive," he continued, "not even for the ones who believe they can control it. You've made a choice, Zara. Now you must live with it." Suddenly, the alley around her seemed to collapse inward, and the world twisted like a film reel being crumpled. Zara felt the weight of it, the pull of time itself bending around her. Everything was distorting, like being submerged in water, the edges of reality blurring and stretching. When the world finally stopped spinning, Zara found herself back in her apartment. Only, it wasn't quite the same. The room felt wrong. The colors were off, as if someone had dialed the saturation too high. The furniture was slightly different, and the clock on the wall was ticking. Only it wasn't the clock she remembered. It was a different clock, one she didn't recognize. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. Her breathing quickened as she looked around, desperately searching for any sign that this was the apartment she had known. But nothing felt the same. It was like she had been transported to a parallel version of her own life, one that had been altered by the tiniest of changes. She turned to the window and her stomach dropped. Out there in the streets, everything was different. The people walked by, but they were strangers. Zara couldn't remember seeing any of them before. They passed without a glance, absorbed in their own lives. The sky outside was a dull, colorless gray, like a filter had been placed over the world. Nothing was as it had been. The city, her city, was no longer hers. Zara sank to her knees, clutching the watch in her hand. She hadn't just bent time, she had fractured it. The more she twisted the watch, the more her reality splintered, breaking into countless versions, each one more distorted than the last. The price of her meddling with time was becoming clear. But how could she stop? How could she undo the damage? Before it was too late? Her mind raced, her thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and panic. She wanted to return to the way things were, to the life she had before the watch had entered her world. But with each turn of the crown, she was only pushing herself further away from it. The ticking of the watch was louder now, a deafening sound. That filled the room. Zara realized, with growing horror, that she was no longer in control of the watch. It was controlling her. It was dragging her further into the abyss, deeper into the fractured paths of time that led to a reality she couldn't escape. She closed her eyes, clutching the watch to her chest. She could feel the weight of her choices, the price she was paying. Time was a cruel master, and Zara had only begun to understand just how much it could take. The world around Zara felt wrong. She couldn't find the right words to explain it, but it was as though she were standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. The colors of the room, the sounds of the city outside, even the air she breathed, all of it felt distorted. She wasn't in her world anymore, not entirely. She stood in the center of the apartment, her fingers tightly clutching the watch, her breath shallow as she tried to piece together what had just happened. How had she gotten here? How had everything changed so quickly? The clock on the wall ticked steadily, louder now, almost mocking her. Tick, tick, tick. It was as though the very sound was growing, expanding, drowning out all other noise, until it was the only thing she could hear, the only thing that mattered. Zara turned her gaze to the window again. The streets outside were filled with people, strangers, their faces unfamiliar. The buildings were the same, but somehow they felt different, smaller. The distant skyline was a ghost of what it had once been, and the gray sky seemed as though it had been scrubbed of color. What have I done? Her mind raced with the realization that the small change she had tried to make had spiraled into something far worse. She hadn't just altered time, she had shattered it. She had fractured her reality, and now she was trapped somewhere between the cracks. Somewhere where nothing was certain, and nothing felt familiar. Zara moved toward the door, hoping to find some kind of normalcy outside. Maybe she could find someone who would recognize her, who could help her understand what was happening. She needed answers, or at least something that made sense. But as she opened the door, she froze. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in an unnatural dim light. The air was cold and the silence was oppressive, stretching out in all directions. The normal hum of the building's old pipes, the sounds of life from neighboring apartments, was gone. The hallway felt abandoned, hollow, as though no one had lived here in years. She stepped out cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. As she walked, her eyes scanned the worn wallpaper, the faded paint on the doors. Everything was the same, but not the same. Zara's pulse quickened as she turned the corner, her breath catching in her throat when she saw the elevator at the end of the hallway. It was different. The doors, once familiar and comforting, now looked aged, their metal exterior rusted and pitted. The light inside flickered, casting eerie shadows in every direction. She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for the elevator button. She didn't know why, but the compulsion was overwhelming. She needed to know. She needed to understand if the world was still real. With a deep breath, she pressed the button. The doors opened with a soft groan, and the stale, damp air rushed out at her. It smelled like something had been left behind, like the elevator hadn't moved in years. But still, Zara stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. As the doors closed behind her, a voice startled her. Going somewhere? Zara whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the corner of the elevator was the man, the one she had met in the alley, the one who had warned her about the watch. His face was still obscured by the shadow of his hood, but there was something about his presence that made Zara's skin crawl. The elevator jolted, and Zara stumbled back, barely catching herself. The sound of the gears grinding, struggling against some unseen force, filled the small space. What is this? Zara's voice was shaky, her mind a swirl of confusion and fear. Where are we going? What's happening? The man didn't answer right away. He simply watched her, his eyes dark and piercing as though he was studying her. Finally he spoke, his voice low and calm. You've been playing with fire, Zara. Time isn't something to be tampered with. But you've already learned that, haven't you? She swallowed, the weight of his words settling over her like a shroud. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to. She cut herself off, realizing how pointless her explanation was. Why is everything so wrong? Why can't I fix it? The man let out a soft chuckle, a sound that was both cruel and amused. You can't undo what's already been done. Time, once broken, can never be made whole again. Not by you. Not by anyone. Zara's hands tightened around the watch in her pocket, a surge of determination flooding her chest. I'll fix it. I have to fix it. The man's expression darkened, and for the first time Zara saw a flicker of something almost regretful in his eyes. You're already too far gone. There's no fixing it, no going back. Time doesn't work like that. The elevator lurched. Again, the sound of the cables groaning under pressure. Zara's stomach twisted. Something was terribly wrong, and it wasn't just the building or the elevator. The very fabric of reality was shifting beneath her feet, the boundaries between what was and what could have been fraying before her eyes. Suddenly, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway much darker than the one she had left. A faint yellowish light flickered overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The man stepped out of the elevator without a word, his figure swallowed by the shadows. Zara hesitated, her eyes darting between the darkened corridor and the elevator doors, which were now closing behind her. She knew, with a sinking feeling, that there was no going back. Whatever she had done, she was now part of something much larger than herself, a part of a greater web, one where every twist of time brought new consequences. With trembling hands, Zara followed him, each step echoing in the silence. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be waiting for her to realize something. As they walked down the corridor, Zara began to notice something strange. Each door they passed had a small plaque on it, one she couldn't quite read, but something in her gut told her they were all important. These doors weren't just rooms. They were markers of time, fractured timelines like echoes of decisions made and paths not taken. Finally, the man stopped in front of one particular door. It was old, the wood worn and chipped. The plaque read, "The Clockmaker's Workshop. This is where it all began," he said softly. "This is where you made your choice." Zara's heart skipped a beat. The Clockmaker's Workshop? But this didn't make sense. The shop had been destroyed. It had vanished. He turned to face her, and for the first time there was something almost sympathetic in his gaze. "Time is not a gift, Zara. It's a curse. And now, you must face the consequences." Zara stood in front of the door to the Clockmaker's Workshop, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her chest. The plaque on the door was worn, but the name was still legible. The Clockmaker's Workshop. It felt wrong, impossible. There was no way this could be the same place. She had seen the shop, she had been inside it. It had disappeared, vanished into thin air after that night with the mysterious man, Mr. Travers. But here, in front of her, was the door to that very same workshop, untouched by time, standing in a forgotten hallway that stretched endlessly, in both directions. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, a mixture of fear and curiosity swirling inside her. Was she ready to face whatever lay behind it? Would she finally understand what was happening to her, to the world, to time itself? The man stood beside her, his presence overwhelming in the silence. His eyes were unreadable, but there was something in his gaze now, something that felt almost like pity. He had never offered comfort, only cryptic warnings. But now, as she reached for the door, she saw a flicker of something in him that seemed human. "You can still turn back," he said softly. "If you choose to walk away, you can still live without knowing what's behind this door. But make no mistake, you've already made a choice, and once you cross that threshold, there's no going back." Zara's pulse quickened as she twisted the doorknob. A gust of cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of old wood, dust, and something else she couldn't identify. It was the scent of time itself, familiar yet foreign, like a memory she couldn't quite reach. The door creaked open slowly, and she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the weight of centuries. The walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of clocks, each one unique, with faces that seemed to shimmer and warp as she looked at them. The ticking was deafening. Dozens of clocks, hundreds, each one measuring time in a different way. Some ticked in rhythm, others in irregular bursts, while some stood completely still, their hands frozen in time. Zara took a tentative step forward, feeling as if she had stepped into a different world, a world where time was not linear, not bound by the rules she had always known. The workshop was cluttered, but there was a sense of order in the chaos. Tools of all kinds were scattered across workbenches, some old and rusted, others pristine, as if they had never been used. In the far corner of the room, a massive grandfather clock stood tall, its brass hands frozen at midnight. It was the only clock that seemed untouched, its surface gleaming despite the dust that had accumulated around it. The man stepped in behind her, his voice low and resonant in the stillness of the room. "Welcome to the place where it all began," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This is where Mr. Travers, your clockmaker, worked, and where he crafted the watch that's now in your hands." Zara's breath caught in her throat as the realization settled over her. The watch. It was the key to everything. The reason she was here. The reason time itself was unraveling. She turned toward him, her voice a whisper. "What does it mean? Why did he make it?" The man's eyes flickered toward the grandfather clock, his expression darkening. The watch was never meant to be used by anyone. It was created as a tool, yes, but not for the purpose you think. It was meant to observe time, not manipulate. But as with all things, humans found a way to misuse it. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. Misuse it? But I didn't mean to. I just wanted to change one thing. The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Ah yes, that's how it always begins. One small change, a single moment that seems insignificant. But each time you alter the flow of time, you disturb the balance. And when the balance is broken, everything begins to unravel." Zara shook her head, unable to fully grasp what he was saying. "But why me? Why did he give the watch to me?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped toward the grandfather clock, his eyes never leaving her as he spoke. Travers created the watch because he believed that time was a prison, that by controlling it he could escape it, but he failed. And now, the watch has chosen you. Zara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The watch had chosen her? Chosen? It hadn't felt like a choice at all. It had been an accident, an impulse, a curiosity. She had never asked for this. She never asked to become the keeper of something so dangerous. "You're the one who can either fix it," the man continued, "or destroy it completely. But understand this, no one can control time forever, not even you." A sudden crash echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of something breaking. Zara spun, around her heart racing. The grandfather clock, the one that had stood so perfectly still, was now trembling violently, the brass hands rattling like they were about to come loose. "What's happening?" Zara gasped. The man's expression shifted from stoic to something darker, more urgent. "Time is beginning to collapse, Zara. Your interference has already begun to tear at the fabric of reality. The longer you hold the watch, the more its influence spreads, the more you choose." Zara's pulse hammered in her throat as she took a step back. "Choose? What do you mean? I don't want this. I didn't ask for any of this." The man turned toward her, his gaze piercing and cold. "Every time you twist the watch, you make a choice. Every time you change the past, you alter the present. And now, Zara, you must face the consequences of those choices." The grandfather clock behind them let out a groan, its hands beginning to spin uncontrollably. The room was shaking now, the walls vibrating with an otherworldly force. "Make your choice," the man said, his voice rising above the cacophony of ticking and cracking wood. "You have the power to fix this, to undo the damage. But be warned, the cost will be great. Time doesn't give without taking." Zara's breath came in ragged gasps as she stared at the spinning hands of the grandfather clock, the world around, her trembling with the weight of her decisions. She had only wanted to fix one thing, one moment, but now she understood. Time wasn't something that could be fixed. It wasn't something that could be controlled. It was a force, a force that could destroy everything in its wake. She gripped the watch tightly in her hand, her heart heavy with the understanding of what she had to do. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What do I have to do?" The man stepped forward, his face shadowed but his eyes filled with an unsettling clarity. "You must choose. Do you let time collapse under the weight of your actions, or do you sacrifice everything to restore it? The clock is ticking, Zara, and you only have one chance." Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the center of the clockmaker's workshop, her fingers white-knuckled around the pocket watch. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the impending collapse of time itself. Every ticking clock, every second that passed felt like a countdown, an inescapable drumbeat leading her toward an unknown fate. She turned to the man, the one who had guided her here, the one who seemed to understand the depths of the watch's power. His eyes were dark, like endless voids filled with knowledge and sorrow. But there was something else too, something she couldn't place. Pity? Regret? "Tell me what to do," Zara said, her voice breaking under the pressure. "I can't fix it, I can't make it right. But there has to be something. I can't just let everything fall apart." The man's gaze softened just for a moment. Then his eyes flickered toward the spinning hands of the grandfather clock, now moving so fast that they were little more than a blur. The walls around them shook with every pulse of time. The air buzzed, thick with energy, vibrating under the strain of an unstable reality. It felt like the world itself was coming undone. "The watch is the key," he said slowly, almost regretfully. "But it is also a curse. Every time you turn its crown, you twist the world just a little more. Each action is a crack in the foundation of everything you know. Time isn't a thing to be controlled, Zara. It's a force, and no one can stand against it forever." Zara's fingers clenched around the watch, the cold metal biting into her skin. She felt its weight more than ever, as though it were pulling at her, drawing her deeper into its gravitational pull. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. "I never wanted to break anything. I just wanted to fix one mistake. One thing. But now everything's falling apart." The man's expression was unreadable, but his voice grew firmer. "Time cannot be fixed by your hands, Zara. You cannot simply undo what has already been done. What you've broken has already begun to ripple outward, affecting more than just your life. Your actions have disrupted the very fabric of existence." The grandfather clock continued its relentless spinning, its hands racing backward and forward, with each passing second like it was caught in an eternal loop, unable to stop. The room seemed to be expanding and contracting, distorting as though the laws of physics were being rewritten before her eyes. Zara's breath caught in her throat as a horrible realization washed over her. The world is dying. I'm killing it. She looked around the room, at the countless clocks ticking away, each one more frantic than the last. Some had stopped entirely, their faces frozen in time, while others ticked at impossible speeds, out of sync with the natural flow of reality. The man was right. She had made a choice when she first turned the crown of the watch, and with every turn since she had made more. Each turn had sent out ripples, small at first, but now those ripples were growing into waves that were threatening to consume everything. I don't know what to do," Zara whispered, her voice trembling. "If I don't stop this, everything will break, but if I stop, what happens then?" The man stepped closer to her, his figure casting a long shadow in the dim light of the workshop. His expression was no longer cold and detached. Instead, he looked almost sad. "You must understand, Zara, time is a delicate thing. Even the smallest change has consequences. You cannot simply choose to undo the damage. Time will not allow it. But you do have a choice." Zara's eyes searched his face, her heart racing. "What choice?" The man's voice dropped to a near whisper, his words heavy with the weight of what they meant. "You can continue. You can keep the watch, keep altering time. But be warned, each twist will cost you something more. The more you try to control time, the more you will lose. The threads of your existence, the very fabric of reality, will begin to unravel. Eventually, it will be too much. And when that happens, you will be lost. Gone. Nothing but a fleeting memory in a world that no longer exists. Zara took a step, her head spinning. She could feel it, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. The watch seemed to pulse in her hand, its power calling to her. She had already changed so much. She could feel the threads of reality slipping through her fingers, fraying with every choice she made. Was there still a way to stop it, or was it too late? "But if I don't do anything," she said, her voice trembling with the enormity of her question, "what happens then? If I walk away, if I leave it behind, will the world be okay? Will everything go back to normal?" The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered to the grandfather clock again, the hands still spinning wildly. Then he turned back to her, his gaze unreadable. "If you walk away, it may not be enough," he said quietly. "Time cannot simply be left untended. There must always be a guardian, someone who watches over it, even if they don't understand its full power. If you leave, time will collapse on its own. The cracks you've created will grow wider, and reality itself will begin to tear apart. You may not be able to save it, no matter what you choose." Zara's mind raced, her chest tightening as she tried to comprehend the gravity of what he was saying. Every option felt like a death sentence in one way or another. If she kept the watch, she would destroy everything. If she let it go, time itself would unravel. She had been given the power to shape the future, but it was a power that came with a price so steep that it seemed impossible to bear. I can't bear it," Zara whispered, her voice hollow. "I can't carry this burden, it's too much." The man's expression softened, his voice gentler now. "It's not about bearing the burden, Zara. It's about accepting that no one can control time. It is a force that cannot be bent without consequences. And those consequences, they fall on all of us." She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Time in its purest form was uncontrollable, and she had learned that the hard way. Every twist, every change had led her to this moment where she had to decide. Would she keep trying to control the uncontrollable? Or would she let it go, knowing that the world would fall apart anyway? The ticking of the clocks grew louder, more frantic. Zara's hand tightened around the watch once more. Her decision had to come soon. Time was running out. With a sudden, desperate clarity, Zara made her choice. "I can't undo it," she said, her voice breaking but steady with resolve. "But I can stop. I will stop." The man said nothing, but there was a glint of understanding in his eyes as Zara took a final deep breath and lifted the watch to her chest, preparing to set it down once and for all. But as she did, the world around her shifted violently. The air around Zara shuddered, and the room seemed to tremble with a force that was not entirely of this world. The clocks on the shelves, their ticks and tocks blending into a maddening cacophony, grew louder, faster, frantic. The grandfather clock, which had been spinning wildly, now began to wail, its brass hands moving in jagged, unnatural arcs. Zara felt the weight of the watch in her hand, an anchor, a burden. She had made the decision. She had chosen to stop, to let time take its course and face whatever consequences awaited her. But as she lifted the watch to her chest, ready to let go, she felt an overwhelming pull, as if the watch itself were trying to resist her. The workshop around her blurred. The shelves of clocks warped, their faces distorting and elongating as if they were melting under some unseen heat. The floor beneath her feet wavered, shifting like sand in a storm. Reality itself was bending and twisting, unraveling thread by thread. "No," Zara gasped, clutching the watch tighter. "It's not supposed to be like this. Before she could finish, a deafening crack split the air, and the ground beneath. Her feet gave way. She stumbled, trying to regain her balance, but it was too late. The very fabric of the world seemed to tear apart, splitting in jagged, uneven lines. The walls of the workshop, once solid and filled with the ticking of hundreds of clocks, dissolved into nothingness. She felt herself falling, spiraling through a vortex of light and shadow, as though time itself had opened a door to another place. In the blink of an eye, she was no longer in the clockmaker's workshop. Zara blinked rapidly, disoriented, as she found herself standing in the middle of a vast, endless void. There were no clocks here, no ticking, no walls, no familiar objects, just an empty expanse stretching out in all directions. It was like standing at the edge of the universe, with nothing but darkness and echoes surrounding her. Her heart raced as she glanced around, but there was no sign of the man, no trace of the workshop. It was as though she had been cast into a place outside of time, a place where time didn't exist at all. "This is not possible," Zara muttered, her voice trembling. She was alone, utterly alone in the emptiness. The weight of the watch in her hand was suddenly unbearable, its cold metal pressing against her palm like an ominous reminder of what she had done. She had made the decision to stop, to release it, but instead everything had collapsed. She had failed. What have I done? Suddenly, the space around her rippled, like a sheet of water disturbed by an unseen hand. The void trembled, and then, like the ripples of a stone dropped into water, a vision began to form in front of her. At first, it was just a blur, an indistinct shape, but then it sharpened, and Zara realized with a shock that it was her. It was her, but not the Zara she knew. The woman in the vision was standing in the center of the clockmaker's workshop, just as she had been, only this time there was a look of confusion on her face. Her hands were trembling as she held the watch, much like Zara had done only moments ago. The vision shifted again. This time it was a different Zara, older, worn. She was standing in front of the grandfather clock, its hands still spinning out of control. Her expression was one of anguish, her face pale and drawn, as though she had aged years in a matter of moments. "This isn't possible," Zara thought, her breath catching in her throat. The vision flickered again, and now Zara saw something that made her blood run cold. The workshop was collapsing. Pieces of it were disintegrating, crumbling into dust. The clocks, the walls, the air itself was unraveling, fading into nothingness. In the center of it all stood the older version of herself, holding the watch tightly in both hands, her knuckles white with the strain. Zara's voice caught in her throat as she tried to speak, but no words came out. The vision was too real, too clear. She wanted to shout, to scream at the other Zara to stop, to make it right. But it was too late. The destruction had already begun. The older Zara lifted her head and met her gaze. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them, a terrible understanding, a realization that all of this chaos, had been caused by her own hands. And then, just before the vision shattered into fragments of light and shadow, the older Zara's lips moved. "Time doesn't forgive." The vision collapsed into nothingness, leaving Zara standing in the void, gasping for breath. She staggered backward, her heart pounding. The words echoed in her mind. "Time doesn't forgive." It was a truth she had refused to accept, but now, as she stood in this desolate, empty space, she realized how wrong she had been. She had tried to control time, to fix a single moment, and in doing so, she had broken everything. And now, she would have to face the consequences. As the last remnants of the vision faded, Zara suddenly felt something cold brush against her arm. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat as she saw him. The man who had been guiding her, the one who had warned her from the beginning. He stood in the void, his expression unreadable. "You," Zara gasped. "You were part of this. You knew what would happen." The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her with an expression that was both resigned and sorrowful. "You were never meant to understand," he said softly. "The watch was never meant to be yours. But you chose it, and now you must bear the weight of your choice." Zara's fingers tightened around the watch in her hand, her breath shallow and rapid. "What does that mean? What happens now?" The man's gaze turned somber. his voice heavy with the burden of truth. Now, Zara, time will demand its price. You will be lost to the world you once knew. You will exist, but not fully, not entirely. The cracks you've made will continue to grow, and you will fade with them, just as the workshop is fading, just as everything is fading. Zara's throat tightened. But I can't go back. I can't. You cannot undo what has been done, he said, his voice like the wind itself. But you can make a choice. A choice? Zara echoed, her mind spinning. What choice? There's nothing left to save. The man's eyes darkened. You can let go. Let time consume you as it has consumed everything else, or you can fight. But know this, no matter what you choose, you cannot escape the consequences of your actions. Time always demands its payment. Zara's heart raced, her thoughts a chaotic blur. She had no idea how to fight something like time. How could she? She had tried to control it, and now everything was slipping through her fingers. But as the man's form began to fade into the void, his last words lingered in the air. Make your choice, Zara. The world will either be your salvation or your ruin. The void seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of nothingness. Zara's heart beat erratically in her chest as she stood there, surrounded by emptiness, the weight of the pocket watch still pressing cold against her palm. The man's words echoed in her mind, each syllable heavy with finality. Make your choice, Zara. The world will either be your salvation or your ruin. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. How could she possibly make a choice now? Time was already spiraling out of control. The world she knew was fading, falling apart with each turn of the watch. She had tried to stop it, tried to make it right, but nothing had worked. Every effort, every change, had only made things worse. And now, here she was, standing at the end of everything, with no idea what to do next. Zara took a shaky breath. It was impossible to know what to do, but she had to choose something. She couldn't stand here forever, lost in this place between worlds, between realities. She had already caused enough damage. Maybe it was time to face the consequences. Her fingers clenched around the watch, its cold surface a constant reminder of what she had done. What if I let go, she thought, the question lingering in her mind. What if I just let go of the watch? Will it fix everything? Will it fix me? Suddenly, the void around her began to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen force. The air grew thick with the sound of ticking, more intense now, louder, as if hundreds of clocks were counting down to some unknown end. Zara gasped as the void itself seemed to pulse, each tick vibrating through her very bones. She spun around, her heart racing, searching for the source of the noise. And there, before her, the space seemed to warp and distort, bending like liquid glass. Time itself was beginning to collapse into a singularity, pulling everything toward it. Then, from the heart of the collapse, a figure emerged, one she knew all too well. It was her, or at least it looked like her. The Zara standing before her was different, older, more worn. Her eyes were hollow and her face was drawn with exhaustion. She seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a shadow struggling to remain in the light. Zara's breath caught in her throat. No, this isn't real, she whispered. This can't be me. The older Zara gave a faint smile, though it was not a comforting one. It is you, Zara. You've seen what happens when time unravels. When you try to control it, this is the cost. Zara shook her head. I didn't mean to break everything. I didn't want this. The older Zara stepped forward, her form flickering more intensely with each movement. The watch never belonged to you, she said, her voice filled with a quiet sorrow. You weren't meant to hold it. But now you've seen the truth. You can't change what's already been done. You can't control time, no matter how hard you try. I can fix it, Zara pleaded, her voice rising with desperation. I can fix everything. I just need to make it right. Please, tell me how. The older Zara's smile faded, and her eyes turned sad. almost mournful. "There is no fixing it, Zara. Not anymore. You've already broken it. Now you must face what you've done." A violent crack split the air, followed by a shudder that shook the very core of Zara's being. She staggered back, clutching the watch in her hand, her entire body trembling. "You don't understand," the older Zara continued, her form flickering as if she were about to vanish completely. "You've made your choice. Time is collapsing. There's no escape. You've altered the world so much that it can't hold together anymore." Zara's heart sank, a hollow emptiness spreading through her chest. She couldn't bear it. "No," she thought desperately. "There has to be something I can do." Her eyes darted back to the place where the collapse of time was taking shape. The singularity, the void at the center of it all, was growing larger, more powerful, pulling everything into itself. The ticking of the clocks was deafening now, the sound rising to a crescendo that threatened to drown out everything else. The older Zara's voice broke through the noise. "You can try to fight it. You can resist. But remember, time does not forgive." Zara's hand tightened around the watch. "I'm not giving up," she said, her voice filled with defiance. "I won't let it end like this." The older Zara's fading form seemed to flicker one last time, her eyes full of something that could have been pity. "You can't win, Zara. Time is a force beyond your understanding. There is no winning, only surviving. And you've already crossed that line." Zara shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I won't accept it," she whispered fiercely. "I refuse to believe that this is it, that there's no way out." For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Zara stood there, paralyzed as the void stretched before her, consuming everything in its path. The ticking grew louder, more oppressive. The reality she knew was slipping away, replaced by the darkness of the unknown. And then, just when she thought it was all lost, a spark of something, hope maybe, flared within her. She felt the presence of the watch again, pulsing in her hand, but this time it wasn't just the weight. It wasn't just a tool. It was a connection, a bridge, a way to communicate with the broken threads of time itself. "I have to try," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "If I can't fix what's been broken, I can at least stop it from tearing everything apart." With trembling hands, Zara raised the watch above her head, its surface glowing faintly as if responding to her will. The void seemed to ripple again, and the clocks in the distance went silent, their ticking fading into nothing. For a moment, time itself held its breath. The man's voice, the one who had been guiding her, whispered in her mind, "You can still save it. You are the key, Zara, but only if you let go of your fear." Zara closed her eyes, her grip on the watch tightening. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know how to fix everything. But one thing she did know. She couldn't just stand there waiting for time to consume her. She had to act. And so with one final decisive motion, Zara let go. The watch dropped from her hands and fell to the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Time froze. The world held its breath. Silence. It was the kind of silence that pierced to the bone. Absolute. Suffocating, as though the very air itself had ceased to exist. Zara stood still in the void, her hands trembling at her sides, staring at the shards of the pocket watch that now littered the ground like fallen stars. The once glowing pieces lay there in shattered pieces, their faint hum silenced for good. The world had gone still. Her heart beat painfully in her chest, but other than that, there was nothing. No ticking, no turning, no time. It felt wrong. Zara took a shaky step forward, but the void remained unchanged. The absence of time, the absence of anything at all, stretched infinitely around her. She should have felt something, relief, or regret, or even dread. But there was nothing. Just the void and the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She had done it. She had let go. But was it enough? The image of the older Zara flickered in her mind, the sorrow in her eyes, the inevitable collapse that had been her fate. She had fought so hard to resist that fate, but in the end, She had made the choice to let it go. Time was too big, too powerful to be controlled. The watch had proved that. And yet, in her final act, Zara had chosen to abandon it, to refuse, the temptation to control what was beyond her reach. And now, suddenly a deep, resonant sound rang through the void, a single, sharp tick. It was low, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. The sound of time reborn. The void trembled in response, as if the universe itself had stirred. The tick echoed again, louder this time. Zara felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she looked around, her eyes widening. The void was shifting, warping as if it were coming back into focus. The pieces of the broken watch, the fragments that had fallen to the ground, began to glow faintly, one by one, their edges pulsating with the rhythm of something ancient, something familiar. And then in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The void was gone. Zara blinked, her vision clearing, and she found herself standing once more in the clockmaker's workshop, the very place where it all began. The familiar ticking of countless clocks filled the air again, steady and rhythmic, each one in perfect synchronization. The walls, the shelves, the floor, all were just as they had been before the collapse. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But Zara knew it wasn't the same. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier, with a kind of presence she hadn't sensed before. The room seemed more alive somehow, as though it was aware of her presence, of the decisions she had made. She looked down at her hands, still, trembling from the weight of her final choice. The watch was gone, the pieces were gone, but in their place, a single clock stood before her. A clock unlike any she had ever seen. It was massive, towering over her, its brass face gleaming in the dim light. The hands of the clock were frozen in place, and yet, the ticking that filled the room seemed to emanate from it, echoing through. The workshop, like the heartbeat of the world itself, it was the only clock in the room that had stopped. A chill ran through Zara as she realized the truth. She wasn't just in the workshop anymore. She was in the center of it all, the center of time itself. Before she could react, the man appeared again, standing in front of the great clock, his face as unreadable as ever. But this time there was no pity in his eyes, no sorrow, only something else. "You did it," he said quietly. "You let go." Zara swallowed hard, her voice raw. I had no choice. Time was too broken. It couldn't be controlled, but I thought maybe I could stop it from unraveling completely. The man nodded, his expression softening. "You were right to let go, Zara. You understand now, time isn't a thing to be controlled. It's a thing to be observed. It moves of its own accord, and all you can do is be a part of it, not try to steer it. You stopped it from falling into complete chaos, and because of that, the world is still here." Zara looked around, her gaze moving over the workshop. The clocks ticked steadily, their hands moving in harmony as if they had always been that way. "But what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Has it all been fixed? Is time healed?" The man's eyes glinted with a knowing, almost sad light. "Time is never truly fixed, it is simply allowed to be. And so you are allowed to be, Zara." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He gestured toward the clock, its massive hands frozen in place. "The clock you see before you is not just a clock, Zara. It is the heart of time itself. And it has stopped." Zara's eyes widened. "But I didn't know," he said, interrupting gently. "You did not stop time. You simply freed it from the weight of your burden. Time doesn't need to be mended. It doesn't need to be fixed. It simply needs to be allowed to move, to exist on its own. And that's what you've done." Zara stood there, staring at the clock. She could feel the weight of its stillness, the absence of the ticking. For the first time, she realized how deeply she had been trapped in the idea of controlling time, of making it conform to her will. But in doing so, she had never really seen it. It was never about control. It was about acceptance. The man's voice broke through her thoughts again. You can leave this place, Zara, but understand this, you will never be the same. Time has marked you. It has touched you, and you will never forget what you've learned. You will never forget what you've seen. Zara's heart tightened. She didn't want to leave, not yet. She didn't want to say goodbye to this moment of clarity, of understanding. But she knew she had to. "Am I free?" she asked, her voice small. The man smiled faintly. "You are free, Zara, but the world and time are not." With that, the room began to fade, the clocks dimming one by one as the light around her shifted, folding into a new world. She felt herself being pulled away, gently, as though the universe itself was releasing her from its grip. The last thing she heard was the soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock, steadily, peacefully. Time was moving again, and she had learned to let it be. Zara's journey comes full circle. By letting go of her need to control time, she has managed to stop the chaos from consuming the world. But she learns that time is not something to be fixed. It is something to be accepted. In the end, Zara is freed from the weight of her choices, understanding the true nature of time. The workshop, the man, and the mysterious watch fade as she steps back into reality, changed forever by her experiences. Time continues, not in her control, but as an unyielding force, one that cannot be conquered, only understood. Thank you for following along with this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to let me know if you'd like any part expanded or explored further.